Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. I'm going to give people a few minutes, a couple seconds to join the room. Again, good afternoon. If you want to say hello in the chat box, maybe share where you're from, joining us from. Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. Your phone line is muted. Please use the Q&A box for questions so that we will be able to see them and answer them later during our Q&A section. So hello again, my name is Leslie Gabay-Swanston. I'm the Director of Program and Systems Quality at the National Summer Learning Association. Here's a little overview of our webinar today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about NSLA. Then we'll hear from our guest speakers, Jose Oromi and Kate Herlock from the Horizons National. Then we'll have some time for questions and then a few announcements to wrap us up. Again, as I mentioned, if you have any questions while we're going through our webinar, please put them in the Q&A box so that our panelists can answer them later. If you put them in the chat box, we might not be able to see them. So please put those into the Q&A box. So a little bit about NSLA. The National Summer Learning Association is the only national nonprofit exclusively focused on closing the achievement gap by increasing access to high-quality summer learning opportunities. NSLA's goal is to increase nationwide the number of high-quality summer learning programs designed to close the achievement gap. To achieve this goal, NSLA recognizes and disseminates what works, offers expertise and support for programs and communities, and advocates for summer learning as a solution for equity and excellence in education. NSLA's work is driven by the belief that all children and youth deserve high-quality summer learning experiences that will help them succeed in college, career, and life. Core to our work is the recognition that high-quality summer learning works. High-quality summer learning programs have been shown to improve reading and math skills, school attachment, motivation, and relationships with adults and peers. So why do we believe so strongly in summer? We know that summer is a time of great inequity for young people, and we believe that promoting and supporting summer opportunities is a way to address this. This goes beyond the summer learning that's in our name. We also want to see programs and communities addressing access to other resources like meals and jobs for young people. Summer is a time for innovation and exploration. Without some of the constraints of the school year, kids are able to try different ways of learning and interact with other adults and peers they might not otherwise. It's also a time for innovation for adults, whether that is opportunities for professional development, new teaching methods, or exploring new partnerships. So now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Jose and Kate to discuss the strategies they have used to expand Horizons National.
Thanks, Leslie. Well, hello to everybody. Just a real pleasure and honor to have this opportunity to share a little bit about our work and tell you a little bit about how we go about exploring expansion in the communities that we're aspiring to grow to, or even in the communities that we currently exist. Today you'll hear from me. I'm Jose Aromi, Executive Vice President with Horizons National. I've been with the organization collectively about 15 years. So for 5 years I ran a local affiliate, and then for the last 10 years I've been working in the national office, both in the supporting affiliates function and most recently in expansion. And my colleague Kate will introduce herself.
Hi everybody, it's really a pleasure to be part of this webinar. Thanks Jose, and thanks to NSLA. So my name is Kate Herlock, and I've been with Horizons National since 2015. And though I had a career in a completely different field, I came to Horizons as a parent at a host school, and fell in love with the program and have been lucky enough to work with it for the last 5 years.
Thanks, Kate. And as you will see on this slide, www.horizonsnational.org is our URL for our website. You can learn lots more about us by clicking on that. But let me tell you a little bit about our history. So we've been around for over 50 years. The initial concept started as trying to use green space at an independent school. The leaders of that school and a few champions wanted to make the space available for children during the summertime to help overcome, some of the educational and enrichment deficiencies that existed in the community. And after about 25, 30 years of working as a single program, we went through a process through Yale University where we looked at the efficacy of the model, and it was a 10-year study that resulted in a number of different really highlighted outcomes. But one of the biggest things was the encouragement from Yale and our supporting membership to be able to expand. And so in 1995, we began to replicate the program. And our focus really is on ensuring that we establish sustainable models for Horizons programs through partnerships with either independent schools, institutions of higher education, and most recently, charter schools, as well as alternative spaces. Currently, we're serving over 6,000 students in 19 states. We have 58 locations that we consider program sites, as well as 4 partnership pilots. We work with a wide range of partners. Our students come from public schools, but typically, the programs take place in the private schools or institutions of higher education or charter schools, like I said before. But the students typically come from public schools. The typical demographic is also that students are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and 2/3 of the students are identified to be below grade level. Our entry point is kindergarten, and our intention is for the students to stay with us at least through the 8th grade through our program and continue on into high school. In order to do that, we focus a lot on attendance and our retention. So our goal is that students will buy into education and develop a love of learning that keeps them engaged in the program, but also continues to allow them to be engaged, throughout their elementary and middle school years, and ideally into high school as well. So we're quite happy with that. We do also track educational outcomes, and on average, we see between 6 and 12 weeks worth of growth over the 6-week summer session. And we track a wide range of other indicators as well, from SEL to parent feedback, to teacher feedback, and so on. The national organization, which is where Kate and I work, provide a support network to our affiliates. We are very much a decentralized network of programs, and the national office exists to help with starting new programs, supporting existing programs, providing a common brand, and assisting with program improvement and other resource generation. So we see ourselves as a cycle of services that support our existing network of programs and help start new ones. Strategically, we have these 4 priorities, and the priority that we'll be specifically talking about today is around scaling, but we also look at how we continue to foster continuous program improvement, ensure sustainability of our network, and promote our brand. Our focus is on positive impact. And as I said, scale is one of our biggest strategic goals for the next 3 years, and our goal is to be able to attain the capacity to serve 12,000 students. We're located across the country, and you'll see that there are multiple versions of how we operate. We are in traditional single site locations. We are in some places where we have multiple locations in one city. And then we also have some regional strategies, which will be kind of the hub of what we talk about today. For a long period of time, since we started replicating in 1995, our growth was really one program, maybe 2 a year. And around 2010, we started looking at a different strategy that really focused on community impact, and also introduced a few new strategies that allowed existing programs to explore growth or allowed us to look at green space opportunities with the idea of being able to have a large footprint in a community in order to address needs within the community, whether it be high school graduation rate, attendance issues, and things like that. What we have found is that by focusing very much on the community's needs, as opposed to just trying to replicate another Horizons program or create another Horizons program, the value proposition has changed, and funders, as well as other stakeholders, have bought into this. So since 2008, over $3 million have been raised or pledged for regional growth. We also see that a large percentage of our network is interested in growing, which is something that was very different from our early years, where we were typically trying to find a new place to be. So it was one community, one program, one school. Now we're seeing our program saying, we really want to be a bigger, better resource for our community. And we're also doing something that's different. Historically, Horizons programs have been privately funded, but as a result of engaging in a conversation about a regional footprint or a community-based footprint, we're seeing the possibility of leveraging public resources in order to sustain programs, and that's taking place in the communities that you see in this slide. So for us, it's really about how we can develop partnerships and how we can do this. Being a decentralized network means that we're relying on folks' commitment and buy-in to the integrity of the Horizons model more so than the fidelity. Flexibility remains rather important in a decentralized network, but it's about trying to find that mutual benefit that allows us to succeed. As we explore growth, we ask ourselves some very basic questions. Why do we want to grow? Why do we want to expand? And that is a central question that needs to be answered prior to beginning the exploratory process. There are many answers to that, but the question is one that we want to tackle. And we usually engage in a process where we look at a market analysis to understand the environment that we're in, looking at things like space, funding, politics, culture, the history of the community, and so forth, and trying to engage in as many conversations as possible with all the different stakeholders to understand the viability of growth. That includes talking with our affiliate boards or the boards of other organizations, investors, partners, allies, and so on. We engage in a process where we try to clarify the intended goal of growth. We try to ensure that there's relevance of that growth to the greater community and define a value proposition. And to give you an example, in Atlanta, back 7 years ago, we had 2 Horizons programs, one in the south side of Atlanta, one in the north side of Atlanta. And they existed and they were functioning just fine. But we started asking the question, what if there were more Horizons programs in order to address what was being reported as a diminishing or decaying high school graduation rate? So we introduced an idea that if we were able to serve 2,000 students in Atlanta, which roughly represented 5% of the low-income socioeconomic population of students, that we might actually be able to make a difference. Historically, Horizons programs have had roughly a 97% high school graduation rate. So we correlated those 2 things. And then we went through the same process that you see in this slide of asking people what they thought of a larger footprint of Horizons programs contributing to the success of the community. And that resulted in an affirmation in that possibility to be able to grow. And then ultimately we defined a risk benefits analysis that helped us understand whether or not what we were proposing to do would impact positively or negatively each of the programs that already existed there. The next stage for us was to develop an exploratory committee. And on this, I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague, Kate, to give you some examples of how we've gone about that specifically for Chicago and Buffalo. Kate?
Okay, Jose. So Chicago and Buffalo were a little bit different for us than Atlanta because they were both green space, meaning that we didn't have any existing affiliates in either city. So for both cities, we first, did our research and then went on a listening tour. And the listening tour was speaking with peer organizations, public and private leaders, corporations, potential funders. And we started those conversations with people that we knew. So people either through the national board or from peer organizations that knew us. And then with each of those conversations that we had, we asked who else we should be speaking to and could they make a warm introduction to that person. So as a result of all those conversations, we identified, 7 in one case and 12 in another, members of the community, the broader community, and these included, potential host schools, so space, potential funders and champions to work with us on a strategy for exploring the feasibility of Horizons in the city. So in Chicago, we worked with members of of a couple of charter schools. We worked with the head of the Latin school, joined our exploratory committee, the head of all the schools for the Archdiocese of Chicago, a couple of funders, individual funders, as well as foundations, and together as a group, and all led by a champion who had heard about Horizons through Nation Swell and grew up in Chicago and had gone to the University of Chicago as an undergrad and a graduate student and wanted to do wanted to bring Horizons to the south side of Chicago. So she was our primary champion. She has since, what happens with the exploratory committee, if the feasibility study suggests that it makes sense to move forward and we've identified space and funding to go forward, then often members of the exploratory committee will roll on to become the founding members of the board for that region. So in Buffalo, we had a similar experience, except a much longer window. So we started in Buffalo at the same time we started in Chicago, and we launched in Chicago in 2018, and we are launching in Buffalo next summer, or this coming summer. And what was interesting about the exploratory committee in Buffalo is we also had members from the public school system. It's a smaller public school system than Chicago's. But our members on the exploratory committee were also tied to the United Way. So the United Way was able to offer us a deeper level of research. And in doing that neighborhood by neighborhood research around need, they also became more familiar with the Horizons program. And Jose, I don't know whether you want me to talk about, funding groups as a way to present the idea.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So one of the things that we have also done, and this was started by the Horizons Bridgeport region at the recommendation of one of their funders, and that is to pull together funding organizations and present the idea, the scope of Horizons, for us, Horizons region in that city, and get input from that community of funders. And that is really the sole reason that you're bringing them together, is to take a look at, for instance, Horizons in Bridgeport, what the scope would involve, what the budget looks like, how many students you serve over time, and the proposed impact, and to get their input on that. And that has two effects. Not only does it hone your feasibility study, but it also introduces the concept of Horizons in the city to multiple funders without asking them for funding. The other key feature of any member of an exploratory committee is that you're not asking them for money. There is no financial obligation as there is to a board. The exploratory committee is purely strategic and advising.
Thanks, Kate. So the existence of an exploratory committee has been probably one of the most transformative strategies in advancing our conversations to explore exploration. Even when we were using these for just one location, it was the exploratory committee that really helped us to develop the buy-in of our stakeholders, including possible funders, but very much our host institutions where Horizons programs take place, and provided the foundation for what is a plan for being able to expand into a new location. So defining goals, defining timeline and budget, become very, very important. And a key element of the exploratory committee is that it's really about, is this feasible and what would it look like in order to define the plan, what many folks would call the planning phase. There is no financial commitment or expectation for the exploratory committee to do anything else other than to explore the viability of a replication or an expansion or growth, adding additional sites, those sort of things. A couple other things that take place during this phase. Sorry, my computer, there we go. Is that we, as Kate suggested, we've used focus groups to pressure test the idea to different groups. It's wonderful when through the conversation process, so prior to establishing the exploratory committee or even during the exploratory committee phase, we can identify people that will host that conversation. So we've had existing funders or new funders act as a convener for that. We've had partner organizations and so forth. On that note, partner volunteer organizations have been really helpful in doing this. Groups like in Philadelphia and New York City, PenPAC, which is an association of University of Pennsylvania graduates that volunteer their time, were helpful in doing the market analysis as well as some of the initial planning. Social Venture Partners, which is another international organization that exists, made up of executives and folks who are got philanthropic interests. They've helped us significantly with our work in Connecticut, and we're also starting to have engagement discussions with SVP groups in other communities. And in Washington, D.C., it was a group called the Compass Group that also volunteered their time to help kind of bring this the planning process together and provide some support to the exploratory committee. So those partner relationships, have been essential for us. One of our philosophies is that we want to build relationships across all sectors. This isn't just about how can Horizons exist in a community in isolation. It's very much about being a good neighbor, being a good steward of the model, within the relationship and the context of what works for everybody. We want to make sure that we're listening and we're applying our feedback, but we're not sacrificing our goals to be able to grow. So for that, we're always looking, to see how we can make it happen. Even though, at times the answer in the end might be that it's not the right time to do that. And towards that, we believe that as you're defining your strategic timeline during the exploratory phase, it is important that you stick to that timeline. So if at the end of the whatever time frame you're allowing yourself to make a decision, you can either choose to extend the timeline, you can make the decision that it's not the right time to go forward, or you can go ahead and move forward. But that timeline creates a little bit of pressure in order to get to a decision. In many of our communities, establishing the goal to be able to expand by a certain date actually has been essential in being able to move the ball forward, as opposed to just an open-ended, can we expand? So that's been really, really important. And in closing, and before we open up to questions, because we'd love to see if we can answer any questions that you may have, we recognize that none of this is easy. And this quote by Henry Ford, to me, has been quite inspirational in the work that we've been doing. And knowing that oftentimes the challenges that we see that are impediments to growth can actually be the things that lift us up. So whether it's a funder being concerned about the crowded space in the community, or a district not fully being ready to embrace what you're trying to do, we found that by engaging in these conversations, developing partnership, trying to listen to what their needs are, and finding ways without sacrificing your identity and who you are in order to find middle ground has been really, really important and useful.
Jose, if I could just add to that, to your point about being a good neighbor, when we have our discussions with during the Exploratory Committee and on the listening tour, our conversations in Chicago and Buffalo in particular with peer organizations have been enormously helpful. And in Chicago, it even inspired the opportunity for a partnership with a peer organization. So I would say, pursue those openly, because you'll find the challenges they face working in a particular city. And it's nice, it's nice for them to know that you went to them and were interested in their experience and learning from them.
Thank you, Kate. So at this time, we would love to open it up for any questions that anybody can have. And I see that there was a question from an anonymous attendee, if they could share this with their boss. And I would say probably the easiest thing would be for if you want to contact us, and we're happy to make ourselves available and share our insight with anybody. So just kind of going back to the original slide, you can find us on www.horizonsnational.org. And I am Jose Aromi, and then you heard also from Kate Herlock. Any questions?
Thank you, Jose and Kate. So as Jose said, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type those in the Q&A box. So while we're waiting to see if there are any questions, Kate, Jose, I had a question. What would you say has been the most critical thing to have in place when you're thinking about expanding into a new area? You mentioned having the Exploratory Committee, having a champion. What's probably the most critical part to have in place, do you think?
It's a combination of things for me, and Kate, feel free to answer in your own way. But we absolutely believe that there must be a champion. This is about the end game isn't to create another Horizons program. The end game is to establish something that's going to exist in perpetuity, but most importantly that it exists in perpetuity in order to help students and to be a resource for the community. So just kind of tackling that question, like, why is it do you want to grow? Why, is this sustainable? Like, what's the impact that you want to create is essential. Kate?
Yep. Jose, I'd agree with you regarding a champion. And second, for Horizons in particular, our second need is space. Because we're a program that once it's established, the idea is that it does operate in perpetuity. Getting that commitment for space just takes time. And so often we can have, if we have a tremendous champion, that helps in every area. But often we can have funding, but not space. But a champion helps in every respect. A local champion. And it does make a difference because we have had both. We've had champions, as I said, in Chicago, of a woman who grew up in Chicago, but currently lives in New York, but she's dedicated to making this work in Chicago. But that's a different experience than having somebody who, we now have somebody who lives in Chicago and can carry the ball in Chicago. Whereas in Buffalo, our champions all live there. And that's ultimately where you want to get to, is to make sure that your champions live locally.
Great, thank you. I see a couple questions about accessing the presentation later. The recording for this webinar will be available on NSLA's website, summerlearning.org, in the resource section of our webinar, of our website under webinars. So I have a question here. Can you say more about what you mean about a decentralized model? What standards must affiliates meet to use the name, brand, logo, etc.? Is it a franchise model where they pay Horizons a fee to operate locally? Also, how much funding does Horizons National provide to affiliates? So, a few questions in there, but let's start with the first one about a decentralized model.
Yeah, so and I think the easiest way to describe this is that independent schools, which is where we were born out of, typically tend to be independent. It's within their conceptual name. So our decentralized network does share a common brand. All of our affiliates operate under an affiliation agreement that Horizons National enters into. It's actually a three-way agreement, which includes Horizons National, the host institution, and the entity that will be the sustaining or governing board. So all of our affiliates have their own local board, and then the national office also has a national board. We have a number of different tools to ensure that communication and representation exists, at all different levels. We invest a lot of time in communication. The brand is probably the one thing that Horizons National owns. We don't have a centralized curriculum, but there is a series of frameworks and guidebooks and tools that folks use to replicate the programmatic model. Ultimately, the other thing that we also help coordinate at the national level is data. And reflecting on Leslie, what you had asked me earlier, maybe the one other piece that I would add is that data has been transformative in our ability to be able to grow. So using data to provide evidence of the efficacy of the model, but also how it's relevant to the specific community is important. So I reference high school graduation rate, but we also look at summer growth at 6 to 12 weeks. We also look at the retention, the attendance rate, and all those sort of things. And that's what we're able to present to folks to say, here's what Horizons historically has been able to do over its 50 plus year arc. So when we want to expand in a community, this is what we are able to provide. We help identify startup resources for programs. We also leverage national funders to help support local program improvement initiatives. So, like, for example, if SEL is something that we're continuing to refine. So we have some funding vehicles to help each of our affiliates implement some social emotional learning elements or school year programming elements. All of our programs have a school year component, but none of our affiliates pay a fee or a due for our program. We've actually gotten a few comments in the past that, that's a kind of an awkward funding model, but for the 25 years that Horizons National has existed, it's been to support existing programs.
Thank you. What are some of the key indicators to be looking for to know you are ready for expansion?
Yeah, great point. And it's and what's difficult about this, because ideally what your indicators would say, it's like, there's funding available, there's an unmet need. Those are two key ones. I would, obviously the third one that you referenced as well, Leslie, are there champions who are willing to take on the charge? But I think in the process of being able to create an exploratory committee, you'll find out, if there are people who are willing to commit to their time to do this, being able to do more or expand or start anew usually requires an extra set of effort from somebody. So are there people willing to invest their time and energy into that? What I do find is tricky is that there are some times where you just have to have belief and faith that this can happen. So you kind of keep pushing forward. The question is, how fast are you able to grow, and how quickly are you able to expand? Kate and I could, share with you a bunch of stories where, we think we're absolutely ready to start something new, and then, and then we're kind of surprised by it not being able to move forward. And that's because we're trying to make sure that the community owns this, the local host partner owns this, and it's not something that we're just, trying to impose for us, and that's because we are a decentralized network. But that faith that it can happen is something that's important to us. An interesting data point is that it takes somewhere between 18 and 24 months for some of our for a lot of our partners to be able to get to yes, being able to start something new and expand. But there have been times where it takes a handful of months to get to yes, and there certainly have been conversations that have lasted for more than 2 years.
Kind of going back to when you first started to expand and replicate, what was the discussion like within your team, the tension between maintaining quality and growth?
Yeah, the tension between quality and growth is it's an important one, and I think it's a healthy one. It's not one that we shy away from, and we're always trying to figure out like what is the right time. We have felt that the aspiring to grow is always a healthy thing to have in your plans, whether it's strategic plans or long-term aspirations, because if there's almost like an intrinsic belief that if you're doing something that is impactful to the community, then why shouldn't there be more? And that's a little bit of what we learned, after the Yale study, which actually lasted, for about 10 years before we created the national entity to start replicating. What came out of that was, you guys have something really good. There should be more. So having that idea from the beginning is important. One of our affiliates, when they were starting, and typically our naming protocol is that we will name an affiliate associated to their host institution. For example, Horizons at Sacred Heart University, or Horizons at the University School Nashville. So this one affiliate, from the get-go, they wanted to have the full city name, and we said to them, it's like, well, if you're going to take on the full city name, then if anybody else within the city wants to start a program, you need to be open to accepting that. They were like, no, you don't understand. We actually want to do that. And I should add that at one point they actually were even talking about the whole state name. So it was really exciting for us to hear somebody who wanted to start a single program, but very much had the aspiration to be able to grow. And that's very much part of our discussions now. Kate, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Jose, no, I think you covered that one.
Thanks.
Good. So we have a question about the curriculum. Who develops the curriculum for Horizons National, and does the curriculum look different across your sites?
Kate, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. So every site develops their own curriculum. So Horizons National does not provide an overall curriculum. Having said that, we have an affiliate support team at National, and we have a national conference, which is an opportunity for the executive directors and board members from all the programs to come together. And there is a tremendous amount of idea sharing and professional development that happens at that conference. And we have a resource library as well that where we have curriculum available if there's a program starting and they're not quite sure where to start. Many of our programs have an overarching theme, and then they build the curriculum in multiple grade levels around that. But what most teachers find is that they love the opportunity to teach whatever they want. And then the opportunity to pause the curriculum and go deeper, because what we're really trying to do is transfer that excitement around learning rather than teach a specific thing. And the way the Horizons grade levels are structured, kindergarten is in Horizons means the students have just finished their kindergarten year. First grade, they've just finished their first grade year. And the reason for that is so that the students spend the summer reinforcing everything they've learned and return to school in the fall ready to go. You know, they're fresh, they're ready to take on the new material, and they're not going to spend the first 2.5 months of school catching up and relearning what they lost over their time away from school.
Kate, if I may, what I would also add to what you just said is that two things. One is that there is a framework or an expected balance of academics and enrichment that all of our Horizons programs need to do, and there's a special emphasis on reading, writing, and math, particularly reading, writing in the early years, and then more STEM-based activities, as they grow. But when we believe in empowering teachers to make decisions based on the classroom size that they have, which is typically 15 to 16 students, in a 5-to-1 student to staff ratio for the whole program. Each program also has a reading specialist. So there are a number of support systems in place to help faculty define that curriculum, as Kate mentioned. But what's amazing is that the level of consistency, across all programs, while at the same time stimulating innovation. So during the national conference that Kate referenced, folks come together and they talk about what's working and new things that they're introducing. And it creates a very rich community of educators, coming together and really focusing on what is helping students learn in out-of-school time, in particular summer.
Thank you. So again, if you have a question for Jose or Kate, please go ahead and type that into the Q&A box. Building off the last question that we had about curriculum, we have a question. How do you ensure that the affiliates are performing at a high level without a centralized curriculum? What do you measure, and do you do site visits?
We do all that. So there is a kind of a unified, centralized database. We use Salesforce, which includes a number of different metrics and indicators. We have a standardized pre and post test that is done for all students. We use the STAR reading and STAR math, Renaissance learning. We use that as a comparison. We track, attendance and retention rate. Obviously, that's a very simple enrollment thing. We also look at things like a student's history, through their districts. We've done retrospective studies where we look at how, let's say, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in our program have done over time by going back to the district and asking them for the history, of standardized test scores and attendance rates and those sort of things. And that is a recent report that we also released as a result of this retrospective study that we did, and it's available on our website, I believe. But we do perform site visits. We have a tool that we call the quality band, which allows us to look at how affiliates are doing And imagine the quality band being, even though it has like multiple levels, there's 3 basic categories, like low performing, middle performing, high performing. And what we're trying to do is to keep everybody from middle performing on up. For us, middle performing, it's not that it's the minimum bar, it's really, that's a strong program. And then the high performings are like the ones that they're innovating and they're rapidly expanding and that sort of stuff. So how are we learning from those high performers in the middle bandwidth in order to help the lower performers? And the idea is to try to keep a very low percentage. I believe the goal was 5%, of programs, not keep them, but that no more than 5% are going to be in that lower bandwidth. And actually, Kate and I just earlier this morning were in a meeting, and we had one of our 62 sites in that low bandwidth, which was something that we were quite happy about, and we're going to help that program increase their performance. And then we look at trends over time. That's also like a critical thing for us. It's not only how a program does in 1 year, but what's their story over 2 or 3 years. And it's the same thing that we look at students. We want students to learn each summer, but it's their history of a long-term developmental process that really matters.
Mm-hmm. Jose, if I can add just quickly, another really important component of the programs is their sustainability. And so we also, one of the things we also look at every year is their annual, every program fills out a financial reporting tool. And that helps us look at not only their budgets and their funding and what they're receiving in kind, how their development is going, but it also helps us look at their board. And one of the things that the national organization does is support board strategic planning, board development, governance, that sort of thing. We consult with boards, across our programs to help make sure they have everything they need, the resources they need to be strong and sustain the program. Because without the sustainability, we can't serve the students.
And to piggyback once again off Kate, what we try to do is that we use those data points from our affiliates, aggregated across the network to help us understand and anticipate where we need to invest time and energy. So one of the things that we have done recently, even though many of us have been working with boards, is that we also went through board source training to be trainers, for boards. So it's the continuum of being able to look at ourselves and how do we support our network? How do we refine our toolkit, per se, in order to ensure that sustainability and efficacy of our programs within a model that is really more focused on the integrity of the model than the fidelity. So we don't need everybody to look the same. We actually encourage each program to embody their local community and their host school culture, but there has to be integrity in the model. So we know that students have to attend at a high rate. They have, we want them to return. That 5-to-1 student to staff ratio, the enrollment metrics and demographics, are consistent. And as Kate said, sustainability are among our key indicators.
Right, and even the number of field trips that the students attend through the Horizons program throughout the year, and so forth. They're part of, Jose mentioned earlier, our affiliation agreement, and within that agreement there are very few things that an affiliate may not do, and then there are a group of things that an affiliate must do, including teaching every student how to swim. But then there's a broad middle ground, and that is where the programs really shine and reflect the culture of their school.
Thank you. So we have a question going back to the conversation we had earlier about champions and identifying those local champions. Do you pay the local champions for their work and time? What incentive is there for them to connect and champion a new site for you?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I think almost in every case, the champions have been identified as volunteers or people that are invested in helping Horizons at the local level. I think in an earlier slide you saw, there's several hundred volunteers across our network that become involved through the summer programs and so forth. We also see parents as well as teachers, our host institution leadership, funders, all as stakeholders, and obviously our board members. So our champions usually come from that immediate community, but they're also identified through the initial kind of brainstorming conversations, with folks. In particular, in our green space explorations, like Buffalo and Chicago that Kate highlighted, it really was just knocking on doors and talking to people and just introducing ourselves, explaining what we do, and then asking people, is this something you could be a part of? Can you be a part of an exploratory conversation to help us understand if this is going to work or not? And again, that exploratory committee is a defined time frame, with a very specific expectation of conversations, but it's got a beginning, middle, and end, and people are not committing to funding. We have some of our programs have paid, for consultants to be able to do that market analysis or do some of the work. And in my opinion, that value has been mixed at times. I almost feel like the most important thing is to find those champions that are, willing to help you out and are not looking for compensation, even though there have been times where that's been useful. Kate, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I was going to add that in our existing regions, regions where we have, or areas where we have an existing affiliate raise their hand and say, I'd like to grow, or I know that there's another in Boston, there were 2 affiliates, and it made sense for them to come together and grow. So sometimes the growth comes from within. And so the champion is identified as a leading board member or ED who really wants to shepherd that growth.
I have another question about partners. Are you currently working with any colleges or university programs? And you talk about, is that a different relationship that you have with maybe other partners that you work with?
We do have, I believe, about a dozen or so higher ed partners where our programs take place. If you go into our website, you can see them all listed. There's actually an interactive map. Higher ed is usually a little bit different, and it at times has been a faster, getting to yes expansion conversation. So if there's a president or somebody higher up in a university who wants to do this, it usually happens faster, and oftentimes there's easier connections to funding, particularly from the foundation community. On the flip side, higher ed is also where we've had so in our existence, we've never lost an independent school-based Horizons program. There have been programs that have transitioned from one school to another, but if it started at an independent school, so far, and I'm knocking on wood, every program has continued to exist. Within higher ed, which we started replicating about 11 or 12 years ago, there have been a handful of programs that have not been able to continue. And it's in part a lesson learned. The importance of that exploratory committee that leads into establishing a local board for that program is just paramount. So in some cases, higher ed, the Horizons program was kind of treated as a project or an activity within a department. So if there were transitions within higher ed, the program didn't persist. Where we've seen that, not happen, have been higher ed institutions that are connected to a Horizons board, whether it be a local Horizons board, or in Atlanta, there's actually a regional board. And in Atlanta is where we have the greatest concentration of Horizons based at higher ed institutions.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your family engagement or your community outreach efforts?
Sure. So family engagement for us starts at student recruitment, particularly, in the very, very first conversation, which is about who we are and our expectation of high attendance and high engagement. The idea is that if a child enters our program in kindergarten, as I said before, they will stay with us at least through the 8th grade. So we're looking for families that will understand and develop that buy-in. Because of the demographic, not every family, is ready to make that commitment. So some of that is about coaching them and helping them and supporting them to do that. All of our Horizons programs have to have a family engagement strategy. It is an area that we continue to refine and improve, and it's a priority area for us because those family engagement strategies do consume, time and staff time in particular, to be able to support. But it is also a decentralized element. So what that looks like in different places varies. But there is an expectation around frequency of family engagement and touch points in conversations. And we've got some innovative ways how people have done it that are being shared across the network and are being replicated once again.
Can you talk a little bit about the professional development that you provide to teachers or entry-level or mid-range staff? You mentioned the national conference is just for EDs and board members. So how are you supporting those under the top leadership?
So a key element for us is that every program has a reading specialist at their program, and that position is actually subsidized by Horizons National. So we fundraise against that, and we cover a portion of that cost. Those people actually receive direct training. So reading specialists receive a direct training from us around literacy practices, instructional practices, but also the implementation of the pre and post tests and being able to analyze the data. We work with faculty, executive directors, kind of in a trainers way. So when they come to our conference or participate in webinars or different things, they can, take back practices that they can readily implement. We do webinars that are open, to the whole community throughout the year strategically. And we also engage in a lot of working groups. So if we want to tackle topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion, or English as second learners, things like that, we invite faculty as well as directors and other key program staff, to participate in those working groups in order to generate recommended practices that others might be able to implement and replicate.
Mm-hmm. And Jose, if I could add to that, one of the beauties of the transition to our regional growth is that within regions, it provides a tremendous opportunity for deeper level professional development. So within our regions, Atlanta, for example, they host full faculty and staff professional development. And they pull all the faculty and staff from the 10 sites within Atlanta together and do that training at that level within the region.
Yeah, and I know we're almost out of time, but that is one of the biggest motivators of why we believe in the regional process. It's a much more efficient and collaborative way in order to help ensure program quality as well as promote expansion. So if there's a local, regional value proposition about how all of our programs can work together, then it results in not only a stronger program, but more impact for the community and more value for our funders and our investors.
So we have a question about sharing a link to the Yale study. So maybe if you can share that with me, I can make sure that there are attendees receive a link to that study.
Yeah, I will send you actually the Yale study. Just so you know, it's over 25 years old, so the relevance of that may not be as great. But I will send you the link of the current retrospective study, which I think has some really useful data for those of you that are summer service providers.
Okay, and a final question: what is the size of your data/analytics evaluation team, and is the centralized function of Horizons, or do affiliates have their own?
Yeah, so data for us is everybody's responsibility. So the data is collected locally, then inputted into a centralized database. The student assessments, Star Reading and Star Math. Obviously the students take the test. But the data is instantaneously available both locally and nationally. The role that we play is that we help ensure the validity of the data, the quality of the data. We do aggregate analysis, and we provide aggregate reporting back to our affiliates. Which includes feedback on what the data means to them and coaching around program improvement. But everybody shares a responsibility on data.
Great, thank you.
Oh, and the data
Thank
team,
you.
the data team is very small. It's like our national data team. It used to be one person. Now it's 2 people.
So I guess one last question. Who can I share a high quality STEM-based curriculum and PD opportunity with to share for your sites? So I guess somebody has a resource that they wanted to share with you.
Yeah, so either reach out to Kate or I, and then we'll make sure that we'll put you in the right, in contact with the right person. Thanks, Olivia.
Great. Okay. So just to wrap us up, thank you again, Jose and Kate, for joining us and sharing with us today, and thank you to our attendees for your great questions. Just a reminder that National Summer Learning Week is coming up July 6th to the 11th, so we'd love for you all to participate. We'll have new resources and activities and information on our website, summerlearning.org. Our event tracker is up now, so if you're planning to celebrate for summer anytime during the summer, please add your event to our tracker. And our annual national conference will be November 16th to the 18th in Washington, D.C. More information to come, but early bird registration is up and open. Finally, make sure you're following us on social media to keep up to date on the latest announcements and resources. We will be having more announcements about upcoming webinars, for example, coming out soon. And again, thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.